Here to cover all things crime, history, and politics, we are at the desk. I'm your host, Nikolai Wagner, and in today's episode, we will be talking about the Heaven's Gate cult, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris's economic policies, countries without official state status, and the latest in international politics. Now, come take a seat with us at the desk. Welcome back to At the Desk. First, it's time to send it over to the crime panel to discuss the Heaven Gate cult. Over to you, Sam.
Thanks, Nikolai. Today, we will be diving into the disturbing yet interesting Heaven's Gate cult. The cult, led by Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Nettles, led to the mass suicide of 21 women and 18 men. Their followers drank a lethal mixture of phenobarbital and vodka, then laid themselves down to rest. It was known as a UFO religion where its followers believed they would transform into an extraterrestrial beings and ascend into heaven aboard a UFO spacecraft. Let's dive into it. So, Savannah, we are going to dive straight to you. Give us more of a background recap of the crime.
Right, so as you were saying, Heaven's Gate cult was run by Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Nettles, aka Doe and T. It took place in the 70s, 80s, and 90s before ending in 1997, where all 39 members committed mass suicide in California in their mansion. It was called Heaven's Gate because, as you said, they literally believed that they would ascend into God's kingdom through a UFO spaceship. This wasn't their original belief until their leader, T, died, because they originally thought their bodies were vessels for beings, and when they would die, their bodies would be taken with them. Now, obviously, when T died and her body was still there, Marshall did have to change this a little bit. He fully believed that he was closely related to God. And when the Hale-Bopp comet came around, they believed that this was their sign and that the portal to heaven was finally open. So they did commit mass suicide. They got their followers by going around, and they would have classes, as they would call it, and recruit students.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so basically the first method of recruitment was publishing flyers, and these flyers described how Bonnie Lou Nettles and Marshall Applewhite were the chosen two that would lead a group of people on a UFO journey that would transform them beyond the human level. The last sentence of the flyer actually read, "If you have never entertained the idea that there might be a real physical level in space beyond the Earth's confines, you will want to attend this meeting." So they held a series of meetings along the West Coast, and this attracted a group of around 20 people. They then suddenly gave away all of their belongings and disappeared in 1975, which is when the group became very reclusive. However, 20 years later, in the mid-1990s, the group moved to California to recruit people through more meetings. They emphasized that this was the final offer before the UFO was arriving, so this definitely created a sense of urgency for people to join. During this time period, they also utilized the internet. And that's what makes this cult so distinctive, is that it was one of the first cults to use technology to spread their message. They created a website called Higher Source, where they published their teachings and letters from members. But with Heaven's Gate and every other cult, the biggest question everyone asks is, why did people join? It's important to put the time period in perspective. It was the 1970s. There was much societal stress at the time. There was the Vietnam War, the Watergate scandal, the civil rights movement, all occurring in the years right before the creation of the cult. The younger generation in America was trying to break away from societal norms and find a different path in life. Many former members have come out and explained how they felt lost and they were looking for a deeper purpose. The leaders made them feel like they were a part of something special, and this group gave them a sense of belonging. And by promising ascension to heaven, this group also gave them a sense of peace.
Yeah.
All right, now we're going to pass it to you, Eva, to discuss more.
Alrighty, so I'm just going to go into a little more in depth of their belief system, which I know, Savannah, you briefly touched on. But so scholars have described the theology of Heaven's Gate as a mixture of Christian, New Age, and ufology, and ultimately has been characterized as a UFO religion. So basically, the central belief of the group was that followers can transform themselves into immortal extraterrestrial beings by rejecting their human nature, and then it would then ascend to heaven, referred to as the next level or the evolutionary level above human. And then, as Savannah mentioned, the death of their leader, Bonnie Nettles, really challenged the group's belief system on this because she died of cancer. And obviously, her body did not go aboard a UFO spaceship.
Yeah.
So they kind of had to change their views a little bit around. And they came to believe that the body was merely a container or vehicle for the soul, and that their consciousness would be transferred to next level bodies upon death. So the only way to really do this was to die. And that is kind of ultimately what led to the mass suicide in that house in California.
And so I'll talk a little bit more about the ending of Heaven's Gate. I know a lot of us are really kind of thinking, especially watching Crime Panel, what's the real crime of this? It's just the manipulation that goes into these cults is, it traps these people. And so while they were going around the country recruiting people, especially from the internet, after Bonnie's death, Marshall was just thinking of, okay, how do we get to this next level? And so he, led the group into believing, once the Hale-Bopp comet goes above us, Bonnie is in a spaceship and she is taking the spaceship and we're going to be joining her. And so this group of 39 people mixed barbiturates with applesauce, pudding, and then they chased it down with some vodka, and they dressed from head to toe in Nike track suits, not sponsored, and they put a bag over their heads and to asphyxiate themselves. And this was taken in levels. 15 people would kill themselves, and then another 15, and then 9, and then it was Mr. Applewhite himself, who was found in the master bedroom, not with the rest of his people that he recruited. And that's what the danger with cults is. Like,
I want to add in, before they died, they all made 30-minute long videos describing
friends and
what was
family.
going through their heads, what they were thinking.
Mhm.
Something else was interesting is there were previous members who considered themselves not worthy enough to live in the house that did stay behind, actually. And there was one person who actually was in charge of books and the website, keeping it running after everyone did die.
Yeah, it goes to show how dangerous cults were, especially in this time period. Like you mentioned in the introduction, before this, we had the People's Temple led by Jim Jones, and we saw how dangerous that was. 918 people poisoning them and killing themselves. And so that's what I feel like almost the inspiration was for Marshall Applewhite, and how he decided, I want to show how much control I have over these people. And the people who were in this cult would do anything to show their loyalty to them, up to medical castration, to prove how loyal they were to this church, to him.
And I just want to say something interesting. This is backtracking a little bit. I just have to give this little pointer in there. You said they were wearing all Nike shoes. And actually, just a little tidbit, a little fun fact, something very interesting was, Nike's slogan, just do it. And their one leader, his nickname was Doe. And Heaven's Gate kind of had a saying that was just do it. Just kind of on like a play on Nike. I just had to say that because I just thought that was interesting. But I do want to hit on the point that you were just talking about, Megan, with kind of the type of people that they did recruit. I mean, you kind of have to think about it in a sense of like, they had to have been people that are so lost, maybe have some lower education, maybe don't really fully know their purpose in life. And it's so baffling to me how you can kind of just take this group of people and make them commit murder on their own life, like make them believe so full-heartedly to make them do this insane act. Like, it's just baffling to me. And I know some people are, they kind of need a leader. They're kind of more follower personalities. I mean, you kind of see that all around. Some people are just naturally more of a follower. They need someone to believe in. They need someone to tell them what to do, give me direction. And those were the type of people that did commit this act. And it's just baffling to me.
Well, let's talk about Applewhite's background. He originally was a professor until he was fired for having an affair with a male student. Before this, he had a wife and then switched and then had an affair with a male student. And I think it's really interesting. I think you mentioned his
father was a pastor, or he was a minister, out in Texas. And so that's where Bonnie and Marshall grew up.
And the shift is really interesting. He went from both of this to actually saying that he hated all things in that like
Yeah.
in that manner.
Mhm.
I mean, the cult itself was very, anti-sex. You weren't allowed to think sexual thoughts. You were not allowed to have partners. You weren't allowed to do any of this, like anything. It was very controlling. But at the same time, like what you were talking about, and I know a lot of people are probably thinking to themselves, who in their right minds would join a cult based on UFOs and stuff like that? You don't know. You've never been in these people's shoes before. You don't know what's going wrong in their life to the point where they feel they have no choice but to follow somebody who they think is truly an ascendant of Jesus himself.
And so what's the sense of like, if you don't know better, like why not believe it? I mean,
Yeah.
like
You don't know.
not going for religion, but like you fully don't know what's out there. So there's a big part of these people that are like, well, I don't want to be the one that's left behind. I mean, let's
Yeah.
say everyone goes, everyone's above the UFO, and I'm just down here. It's like there almost is the sense of like loneliness and this
Mhm.
kind of need to feel like, well, if this is true, what am I going to do with that? Like I'm going to be,
Who
left
might have
behind.
proved wrong.
Exactly. So like it's very easy to kind of not very easy, but you can kind of see a little bit what these people might have been thinking. Because I feel like it's very easy, we're in college, we're educated. It's
Yeah.
very easy for us to look and be like, well, this makes no sense. How could people even think this way? But I mean, it really, if you really look at it, especially, the times and back in the day, it is very possible how these people were kind of viewing it.
Yeah, I also want to, I always have to bring in like criminological theories
Yes,
into
ready
this.
for it.
So here's my criminological theory. We know that when people commit crimes, it is sometimes because they don't have a strong sense of community, a strong
Mhm.
sense of belonging. They have weak social ties. So you see with these people, that's why people join gangs.
Yeah.
That's to get those strong social ties. So something with the cult is a very similar thing. Maybe these people didn't have strong social ties. They saw this leader, they saw this group that they could belong in, and that is what Eva, you were saying, why they would maybe join this.
Mhm.
Something I also found interesting was people left their families, people
Yeah.
left their loved
Mhm.
ones. I've heard loved ones speak out. So some of them might have weak social ties. Some of them also just might have been lost and might have not been happy. But also something I find so interesting is how happy these people look in these videos.
It's
It
almost
is-
concerning.
It's concerning. It is pure joy. The smile never wipes off their face.
Mhm.
Even when they're saying their goodbye videos, they're laughing, they're hugging.
Yeah.
I mean, it is absolutely insane to me.
It's crazy how much believing
Mhm.
can be powerful.
You have to
Yeah.
have such a sense of like, this is everything. Like
yeah.
your mind is completely brainwashed
Yeah.
to the point of like, this is like life, to be able to leave everybody, leave your family, leave everything you've ever known. That is all you've ever known is this life. And it's just insane to me. But another kind of thing I kind of want to mention is just imagine, the officials and officers who walked into that scene
Oh my
and walked
God.
into that house
Mhm.
and saw such a disturbing yet interesting kind of crime scene. I mean, the bodies laying there with the purple,
Mhm.
I'm gonna say this, but the trash bags over their faces. Like,
Yeah.
just imagine walking into that and being like, what in the
heck?
world
What
just
the-
happened? Like, actually, though, because I don't even know how you could fathom that. I feel like that's something they've probably never seen.
Yeah.
I always wonder, like, what was that moment when they
Yeah.
walked in?
It's especially
Crazy.
surprising because we've been talking a lot about how, these people were happy and, you didn't think they were attached to their family. But Bonnie and Marshall, they would let the people who were in Heaven's Gate contact their family once a year. I remember one time hearing that they were allowed to visit their families on Mother's Day. And the mental control that they had over these people to where you can't even see it, but they can just in a snap of their fingers say, okay, you are poisoning yourself, you are killing yourself to be on a spaceship. In our minds, that's absolutely bonkers. But to them, that's what they believe. They were under the assumption that Bonnie and Marshall were the second revelation. They read the book and they were the two witnesses of the second revelation. And you can't prove them otherwise, so of course you just got to go with it. And when you don't have the unity that you were mentioning earlier, who knows what your next group is going to be.
And when Bonnie met Marshall at a hospital,
Mhm.
she had been previously told by a psychic to keep out
Yeah,
for a man with
like a
fair
fair-skinned man.
skin. And so when she met him, she immediately said to him, she's like, you are like in this prophecy
Yeah.
with me.
She was very prophetic in the occult. She saw psychics. She was very just interested in UFOs and kind of the conspiracy stuff like that, especially in the 70s when that wasn't as big as it would be now. But it got bigger with the internet. And so that's what attracted this large following. Even if it was only 39 people, that's still crazy how you can just keep up this religion for decades, like you mentioned.
And I always think about the families of these people who were in the cult. And I know we talked about that a little bit, but it's always so interesting to me because this is kind of different, but I feel like now when I see things that involve more recent cults or more very religious followings, I've seen some things, whether it be TikToks, documentaries, where the families of these members who are involved are very distraught. They're very we lost our daughter, we lost our son to this religion, to this cult, to these people who are telling them what they should be doing. And I know the times were a little different and this is more recent, but I always wonder, the people who did have those strong family ties, did they try to help? Did they try to say something? Or was it just kind of that's what they believed at the time? I mean, I know we don't have a ton of evidence on that, but were they trying to say something? Were they concerned when they got these farewell videos? It's what was going through their heads with that?
Especially since you can't really pinpoint are they going to actually do it?
Right. It's you don't know for sure what's happening there. And you're just so kind of disconnected. Like you even said, they could only contact their families once a year. They didn't even know what was happening. So when this mass suicide did occur, it was probably such a huge shock to them. And that might have been the last time they talked to their son or husband or, whatever, who was part of the cult, which is just insane to me.
Yeah. So that is unfortunately all the time we have for tonight. Tune in next week to discuss another intense crime panel. Back to you, Nikolai.
Thanks, Sam. Stay tuned for our politics panel as they discuss the economic policy of each presidential candidate. We'll be right back at the desk. We are once again back at the desk. It's time to send it over to the politics panel to discuss the economic policy of each presidential candidate. Over to you, Jackson.
Thanks, Nikolai. One of the most hotly contested, if not the most contested topic of the 2024 presidential election is the future of the United States economy. Both candidates have laid out their plans for the next 4 years, with heavy emphasis on strengthening the middle class and making everyday items more affordable. Economists have argued for both candidates, with some saying that either Trump's or Harris's plans could potentially dip the state of the economy even lower than it already is. So the economy is maybe the most important issue of this campaign because right now, many Americans are not happy with the current state. You're seeing prices of everyday items up 50, 60%. You're seeing inflation through the roof. You're seeing people unable to afford rent, unable to afford basic amenities. So I want to start with you, Jordan. I want to hear about kind of like what Trump's laying out, also what Trump did during his first term and what Biden has done during his last 4 years to kind of justify what Kamala Harris is planning.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, when it comes to the economy, it's a topic that a lot of people are interested in because I think the big thing the American people want to know, how will this affect me? Who is going to help me get to where I want to be? And I think it's interesting because whenever you look at these policies, it's very much up to these individuals to decide, did this work for me? Did this not? Because I could sit here and say, yeah, this worked. And Yaya could say, no, it didn't. And so I think that's the interesting side of, economic policy is that it's hard to pinpoint what specifically works for certain people and what doesn't and how people feel on these different issues.
Absolutely.
I mean, if we're looking at inflation, which was at about 9% back in 2022, which was its peak, it is now down near its federal target rate, which is like 2.2%-ish, but it's still a very high impact issue among voters. People see the prices of groceries, like you were saying, and their eyes are bulging out of their heads. It's prices are bad right now. People fail to see sometimes, though, that prices and inflation aren't the entire economy. For the past few years as a whole, Biden's economy has actually been extremely successful, whether it's been through the Inflation Reduction Act, which has created over 100,000 jobs, or whether it's $1.4 trillion into infrastructure and Investment in Jobs Act.
Mm-hmm.
And he has been able to successfully lift the economy out of the recession that was caused by the pandemic. In fact, jump-started it way ahead of schedule. I think that deserves some credit. That being said, though, as I was just saying, there are issues with prices right now, and that's what voters care about. People don't like having to spend a lot, and that's going to affect Harris in her campaign.
Yeah. When we talk about economic policy, I always find it really interesting that people talk about Trump's economic policy or Biden's economic policy, when in fact, economic policy comes from Congress. And I feel like it's easier to say, it's kind of like a shorthand almost when you talk about your administrations. But just for the sake of our discussion today, we're going to keep calling them Trump's laws, Biden's laws, and stuff like that. I'm glad you brought up the IRA because that was one of the really big pieces, I think probably the biggest piece of administration that Biden signed into law. I also want to compare that to Trump's Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. That was something that he also signed into law in 2017. And there were a lot of things that he did. His big thing was cutting taxes and creating jobs. That's why the act is called the way it is. So what he did was he reduced the corporate tax rates from 35% to 21%, had tax cuts for individuals as well, not just corporations. And this actually did have some merit just because obviously it makes America more competitive abroad, especially when you're cutting corporate tax rates. When we talk about corporate tax rates, there is this phenomenon called race to the bottom. And so everybody wants to have really low corporate tax rates so that more companies are attracted. And so this helped boost American competition abroad. I would say, though, my biggest quibble with this piece of legislation is that it seemed more geared towards the wealthy. Obviously, tax cuts help everybody. The act itself helps to simplify the act of filing taxes, which it's a headache. Like everybody hates filing taxes.
No one likes doing that.
No one wakes up and is like,
It's not
"Oh,
a fun,
tax day."
not a fun experience at the kitchen table.
Exactly.
And what I'll say to what both of you said, so Joe Biden has grown the economy from the pandemic. That is true. But Americans don't really care about a growth in GDP or a growth in the economy if they can't afford everyday items. Now, as you've mentioned, there has been a net growth of jobs because during the pandemic, obviously, you saw 14% unemployment. And then by the time Biden took office, it was around 6%. So it did go significantly down, the unemployment rate, before he took office. But yes, he has grown the economy. But yes, again, though, the inflation and the constant printing of money and the lack of like real wages rising, Americans are just kind of fed up with the current state of it, and what they've seen is that under Trump's economy, they were able to afford these items day to day. Now there might be more to it, like you said, but they also they see things that they only see what affects them, and that's why Trump is winning on this issue right now.
Well, and one of the interesting things that you both had brought up, and I think it's worth noting, is that a lot of the times you'll see the American public very quick to say, "Oh, Biden's ruining the economy, Trump's ruining the economy, this, that." But I think the thing that tends to get overlooked is that the way that the world impacts all of that. So it's not one person sitting behind a desk making these decisions. You have to look at the globe as a whole. What's happening around the world? What's happening in the US? COVID, that's going to affect things. Wars, that's going to affect things. But I think people don't always necessarily take that outlook and look at everything in a global perspective. They just want to sit here and say, well, this is making me upset, or everything's too more expensive than it should be, or I'm not getting as much of a tax cut as I want to be getting. But they don't necessarily understand the context in which all these things exist together. And I feel like maybe if they did, that might help with the situation. But you're right. People aren't necessarily always going to look into that. So what they're going to say is, oh my God, eggs are $7. What is happening?
Absolutely.
I mean, there's some truth to what you said. Real world, the president doesn't have much influence over the actual economy. They do what they can, and they create laws or whatever to help, bring it up or bring whatever. But I just want to talk a little bit about Trump's economic policy, especially the tariffs that he has planned coming up. I mean, he had a trade war with China back during his first term, lost 178,000 jobs for tariffs on solar panels and washing machines. It increased the budget deficit by 1.9 trillion. Sorry, Trump's tax cuts increased by 1.9 trillion, which is double of what Biden's budget deficit has been.
I'm glad you brought that up, actually, because Trump's trade war with China was really detrimental to the U.S., especially when we talk about trade deficits. There's a common conception in the U.S. that obviously you want to have manufacturing jobs at home, and to a certain extent, I can agree with that. But when it comes to things concerning the economy, free trade, I tend to side with the people that have actually gone to school to study the economy, this wild thing we call the economy, the economists. And so much research points to the fact that freer trade is much more beneficial for the economy than anything else. And so putting up these tariffs and these like trade barriers doesn't do much for the American people. We see it with American sugar farmers. The fact that they have such a large monopoly and they're able to lobby to Congress to keep sugar manufacturing in the U.S. is actually really detrimental to the everyday U.S. consumer. And so that's another thing that people, I feel like, have a misconception of, is that outsourcing jobs is going to directly take away jobs from you. But that's not necessarily the case. Actually, there's trade-offs. And I think that's something that people need to be more aware of. And I don't think Trump's economic policies is helping that.
It's definitely a give and take for sure.
Well, yes, I think that it's something that's complicated because on the one hand, you don't want countries like China ripping off the United States of America, and that's what's happening right now in many facets. You're seeing, a lot of the prices like you mentioned, how the economy is a global thing, not just a U.S. thing. A lot of that is happening because of countries like China and the way they're manufacturing their products, and that's why prices are going up. So I think what Trump's trying to do with the tariffs is encourage manufactured homes so that we as Americans have more control over the products that we are consuming, so that we're producing them and consuming them. And that's why I think a lot of Americans are being more convinced of his economic policy. And plus, he did put on some tariffs during his first term, and that did create a lot of jobs. And
But
it
in
did
the short
create
term, though,
in the short
there's
term
no
possibly.
longevity to his
But here's the thing that
economic
we
policies.
really don't know because of the COVID recession what it would have done in the long term, because that completely wrecked the entire global economy. So we really don't know what that really would have done in the long term.
Well, and I think that brings up a really good point is a lot of the time, this is a long game that we need to play. The economy is not something, it's like a ship. You turn the wheel, it's going to take a while to correct itself. And I think a lot of the times, especially whenever you have presidents coming in out of office every 4 years, if they're not elected for a second term, you don't necessarily get to see the full potential of these plans that they lay out. I know the Inflation Reduction Act, the idea of it was like a 10-year span of having everything play out. But of course, if someone comes into office and changes that, you're not seeing the full potential or the full effects of these policies because they're not given time to grow and to foster. And maybe that begs the question of, should we be trying to make more bipartisan policies that both sides can agree on? That way we can give it that time, give it those years to build it into what we want it to be, rather than every 4 years coming in and changing it and doing something different.
I mean, the thing with the tariffs is going forward for the next 4 years, Trump wants to put a 60% tariff on all goods from China and 20% on any other imports from other countries. This has been,
Which is a lot.
yeah.
That's huge.
I mean, if we're looking at his first term, his tariff plan was agreed upon by economists to be a disaster. Over 1,000 of them wrote a letter to Trump, a bunch of them Nobel Prize winners, saying that pursuing a trade war with China was a bad idea. And he's planning, and that being said, Biden did keep a bunch of those tariffs in place and obviously didn't revert any of them.
And that's my big question to a lot of people who are criticizing Trump's first. Why did Biden and Harris keep these tariffs in?
I mean,
That's a great question, and we can't answer
Yeah.
that
Yeah,
unless we went to
how do we
Biden and
know?
Harris. I would lobby the same criticism towards Biden and Harris for keeping that type of policy because, as I just said, free trade is so much better for the average American consumer. And this is where we get into, I'm going to connect this back to our tax cuts. When your policies are more geared towards corporations, towards wealthy people, I'm going to take issue with that. And I don't think that Biden and Harris have done a good job of convincing people that they're for the working class. Obviously, Kamala's new policy, she's talking about giving tax breaks to people who are wanting to have children, tax cuts for children so that they can afford childcare, looking to give tax cuts to small businesses. And this is the type of policy that I'm looking to see because in my personal opinion, I just don't think that Trump really can say he works for the working class when all his policies are geared towards corporations and helping them out. Obviously, individual tax cuts, that's good. People got higher returns on their taxes. I'm not going to knock him for that. I'm going to call that a positive externality. That came as an unintended consequence to a bill and a law that was geared towards another tax bracket.
Yes, and so you saw under his first term, you saw the tax bracket, 5 out of the 7 tax brackets did get cuts. You saw no change in 2 of them. But yeah, I think a common misconception a lot of Americans have is that corporations aren't always billion-dollar businesses, and not even million all the time. Corporations means, I forget the exact definition, but it's not always a massive business, an Elon Musk type person leading it or Jeff Bezos. So his corporate tax cut was something that benefited a lot of small businesses as well. And you were seeing thousands and thousands more dollars in American taxpayer pockets because he wanted to, again, stimulate home growth and not global growth. He had more of a nationalistic economic agenda. And that's what he's pushing for even stronger this time due to the fact that right now the economy is in a worse state than what it was at the end of Obama's term.
Well, and I think that's an important thing that you bring up. A lot of the time, I feel like the decisions being made surrounding the context in which we're living in. So obviously in this first realm, we've got COVID. We have a lot of interesting things happening kind of as an effect of that. And you have to make decisions based on what we're living in right now. But as we're adjusting and we're recovering and this is happening and that is happening and changes are happening, that also kind of means we have to adjust the economic policies that we have in place. But I think when it comes back to it, if you're going to boil it down into the simplicity of it, every American cares about the health of the economy. Every American would I shouldn't speak in, what's the word I'm looking for? Generalizing. But I feel like you could say, having a strong economy is something that's important to voters. And we've seen that. And having, tax cuts or things like we talk about here and all these different Why am I'm blanking on the words,
Oh,
but
yes,
like,
I get what you're saying. I think that both Harris and Trump are primarily, like I said in my opening, they were trying to appeal to the middle class because the middle class is what's going to win either one in the election. That's going to appeal to the Rust Belt voter. That's going to appeal to the just kind of like average Joe, family people like that, not the super rich or the super poor.
Yeah.
So they're going to try to build the economy that is going to appeal to that general group.
Yeah, I mean, I think the economy can't really, or people can't afford goods the way that they used to at the end of Obama's term. I kind of take issue with your claim that the economy is worse. Inflation has gone down, like Ryan said, but also inflation is going to go up regardless. Like just because of the nature of our economy, like inflation is going to happen. Zero inflation means you have a stagnant
It's going to go
economy.
for 2 to 3%, I believe. But the problem was at the beginning of Biden's term, you saw a massive increase, and the real wages did not adjust since.
Right,
so the
but he's
prices are still
inheriting an
extremely
economy. He's
high.
inheriting an economy after a global pandemic. So right off the bat, obviously, it's
Inflation
not
was
going to be all
expected.
sunshines and rainbows. Like eggs are not going to be $2 after a global pandemic.
Inflation was going to increase, maybe not by 9% a year, maybe more than that.
I mean, Donald Trump helped add to the inflation rates himself with all the stimulus checks he did. He did those. Biden did the same thing, raised inflation. I mean, inflation was expected as a result of the pandemic and the recovery from said pandemic.
well,
Yes,
I feel like
I
at
think-
the end of the day, it always comes back to how can we help, not just higher income earners, lower income, but how can we help everybody? How can we have people in office that are going to create policies that are going to help the middle class and the small businesses and everyone, because that's what everyone's looking for. Every voter has an interest in the economy and how it can help them.
Yes, and again, I think it's the most important issue just because it affects literally everybody. We can talk about
Mhm.
social issues, we can talk about the war in Gaza, we can talk about all these things, but at the end of the day, every American cares about what's in their bank account, what's in their wallet, and what they can afford for their family. And I think that's kind of the overall summation we should be looking for here.
Yeah.
With the election cycle closing in on its final weeks, President Trump and Vice President Harris will continue to campaign and attempt to convince the nation that their plans will make everyday life easier and more prosperous. Back to you, Nikolai.
Thanks, Jackson. Stay tuned for our history panel as they discuss countries without official state status. We'll be right back at the desk.
Cool.
We are back at the desk. Now it's time for the history panel as they discuss countries without official state status. Over to you, James.
Thanks, Nikolai. Today on the history panel, we will be learning about the history of various countries. However, you won't find these countries in any typical atlas. In fact, these countries don't exist. More specifically, they are states that aren't officially recognized by the United Nations. They are very real, independently declared nations that often go overlooked because of their status. We'll be playing a game to shed some light on their histories. A flag of an unrecognized country will appear on the screen, and the members of the panel must guess what country the flag belongs to. The correct answer will then be revealed, along with a brief explanation of its history. Today, we invite you to join us on a trip around the globe to uncover the mysteries of these secret countries. Should we jump right into it, guys?
I am beyond ready for this. In fact, I love flags of countries, I must say.
This one is mine. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Oh.
I like Northern Cyprus.
Okay.
I do.
Christiania is killing me. I don't know. I feel like it's saying Greenland to me.
Yeah, actually, I'm switching to Greenland.
That looks like Greenland.
I'm
I was
gonna
going to
switch to
say
Greenland.
that looks a
I'm
lot
gonna
like
go
Flag
Greenland.
Greenland.
Y'all
Y'all are
copycats
so
on this
confident, and
panel.
I'm not, so I'll go along with the graph.
Copycat.
All right.
Well, I will say this is probably one of the most gettable ones. And the answer is, in fact, Greenland. Well done, guys.
Wow.
Yes.
Uh,
Well, than me, they all hop
yeah.
on the bandwagon.
Yeah, that's very
Wow.
true.
I mean, Greenland is actually the world's largest island. It is a subcontinent that is geographically associated with North America, but more culturally associated with Europe. It's technically part of the Kingdom of Denmark. And however, in 2009, it was granted self-sovereignty by the Danish Queen herself. And it's now a fully autonomous country with its own government, capital, and around 56,000 people. However, in situations of foreign policy and currency, it is considered a dependent territory of Denmark and therefore not recognized independently by the UN.
I didn't know that Denmark still had a queen or a king.
That
Yeah.
is so cool.
I didn't really either until I started
2009,
looking
the
into
Queen
it.
of Denmark. Wow.
Yeah, she went herself. And I think they gave whale meat to the people there.
I heard it's a
Oh,
delicacy
that's-
over there.
Yeah.
Not environmentally friendly, but that's okay.
It's an occasion.
We'll move on from
That's
that.
culture.
Circle of life.
Yeah. So I think this next one is mine. I'm very excited. Ah, yes.
Oh, I like this flag.
Ah,
This is
yes.
different. Lots of
Washmouth is crazy.
I like how we have Swashmouth and
Yeah.
Swashland. Is it Swashmouth? Like Dartmouth?
Oh, maybe.
It's up to the viewer's discretion.
So, yo, I'm going to say Swashmouth is calling my name. Yeah, that's what I'm going to say.
I think because of Brandon's comment that it's up to viewer discretion, I don't think that's the actual country. I'll say Liberland.
Liberland.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump on that
Liberland?
bandwagon because I think the swashes were thrown in to throw us off. I'm gonna go with I'm gonna go with Liberland.
I will say that I don't recognize any of these names. Liberland is speaking to me though, so
Is
I'll
it?
go with that.
Okay, well, your Liberland guesses were very good because it is Liberland. Liberland was actually this is one of my favorite stories I've ever read, and it's close to my heart because, as you guys know, I studied abroad in the Czech Republic, and this country was actually founded by a Czech politician, but it wasn't in the Czech Republic. I mean, what are the odds there? It was in between Croatia and Serbia. So after Yugoslavia breaks up, there's this like 7 kilometer square kilometer like piece of land that nobody claims. So this guy, who's a super right-wing politician from the Czech Republic, believes in like no government interference with anything at all. Like he just wants everything to be a free-for-all, essentially. He is like, all right, it's mine now. And he claims it, and it worked out. And you can go on the website, you can get like, it's just a campground, basically. They hold events there with Croatian people a lot of like birthday parties and whatnot. And there's like small townsfolk and everything like that camp there. But like most of the people that live there are just campers, adventurers, whatnot. A lot of European backpackers actually swing through there, which is really cool. I think my favorite part about it is that they have a podcast. This country has a podcast called The Liberland Show. And in fact, it's gotten a little bit of support. I don't know if you know Javier Milei, the president of Argentina, rather controversial figure. He has a lot of support for Liberland. In fact, he visited Liberland.
Is the podcast in English? Is there subtitles?
I do not believe. In fact, I
transcription?
did not listen to it. And even though I lived in the Czech Republic, I don't know if I could tell you the difference between Czech, Croatian, or Serbian. So even if I did listen to it, I really wouldn't know. But it's called The Liberland Show, and the website's in English. So I give it the benefit of
I'll
the
give
doubt.
it a listen.
Yeah.
Oh, I will. I'll come
Check
back.
it out.
I'll come back with my thoughts.
European World
Yes,
Tour. We're
please
going to
do.
Liberland.
All right, this is mine. So
Pretty.
guess away, right?
I'm gonna go with Kashmir.
Oh, that one was calling to me.
I'm gonna go with Kashmir just because it kind of looks like the flag of Pakistan, and I know that it is in a territorial dispute with India and Pakistan right now. Based off that, I'm gonna go with Kashmir.
I agree.
I third
yeah.
that.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
I mean,
Yeah.
that spoke to me right away.
Wow, you guys cannot think for yourselves. Well, you were right. It is Kashmir. Yeah, so basically, Kashmir is a province between India and Pakistan. It's been very heavily disputed since 1947 because of the partition of India and Pakistan. It was actually part of the Mughal Empire that was proliferating before the British Raj, which is when the British came and colonized India. It was headed by a Muslim emperor, and they had their little heyday. But right now, India and Pakistan are like butting heads over who gets full control over it. So far, it's autonomous, but they do have one part that's administered by Pakistan, another part that's administered by India. China was in the mix for a little bit too.
So-
Random,
And if
but
you're
yeah.
wondering who divided these borders up, look no further than the British.
I was just going to
Alright.
say, 2 parts of land being disputed by 2 different countries that claim that they own it. Sounds kind of familiar to me.
Yeah,
And the British,
where- Where have we heard that story
Yeah, I
before?
feel like I've heard that story
But
before.
yeah, that's Kashmir.
Good song.
Not to be confused with the sweaters.
Oh, okay.
Or the Led Zeppelin song.
Right.
I think it comes from
Here, yeah.
All right, next up, I think should be mine. Oh, it is. Okay, perfect.
Ooh,
What?
that is not Ukraine. I can tell you that right now.
Definitely.
I can also tell you that. That was not
I'm going to go with Crimea. I like that. I like Crimea.
any
Right?
thoughts.
I've heard of Crimea. I feel like that's an actual territory that's being disputed by Russia and Ukraine. So I'm going to go with Crimea.
I'm gonna jump on the bandwagon. That is Crimea.
Pick something different.
For the record, I'm not jumping on the bandwagon. I do know this one. I believe this is Crimea.
It is.
Oh, let's go.
Yes, it was
Thank
Crimea.
God.
So it's a peninsula off of Ukraine, and it declared its independence from Russia and also Ukraine 4 different times in 1917, 1918, 1992, and most recently 2014. Most recently, it was annexed into Russia, but the UN does not recognize it being a part of Russia, and also Ukraine still claims that it's part of Ukraine. There's 2 million people living there, so
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. That's not really a micronation.
dense history.
That's a nation. Oh, wow.
Nation without a state.
Yeah.
Nation without a government.
What could it be?
Gosh.
All right. All right.
Oh, I don't know. I can't even begin to try and pronounce these.
Abkhazia?
Oh my gosh.
All the options are actually disputed territory.
Really?
Oh, great. So we just have to guess the right one.
Okay.
Yep.
Transnistria is calling my name.
Okay.
Okay, I'll get away from the group and I'll say I have no idea, but I'll go with South Ossetia.
That's what I was going to pick.
These would be really cute, like children's names. They can actually like mean something.
South
Come here,
Ossetia.
Transnistria.
I want to throw a curveball. I'm gonna go Tuva.
I'm going to go
Okay.
Nothing behind that.
That's what I'm going to go with. Abkhazia, yes. That's what I'm going to go with, yeah.
Well, the right answer is South Ossetia. So this is a secessionist part of Georgia, but it is backed by Russia. Fun fact, it relies on Russia for military, political, and financial aid. It seceded from Russia in 1992. And after this, like the living situation for ethnic Georgians became really bad. And this led to the full-scale Russo-Georgian War of August 2008, which Ossetian and Russian forces gained full de facto control over the territory at that time. And since then, both Georgia and like a large part of the international community regards South Ossetia as being occupied by the Russian military.
Wow.
And another option on there, Abkhazia, that's also a Russian-backed disputed territory.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Russia missed the call of the scramble of Africa. That whole colonial heyday is over.
Love a good proxy war.
Love
Don't
it.
you? Really fun.
So great.
Hey, still going on today.
Yeah. Ooh.
This is mine again.
Oh my gosh.
I know Lakota's real.
Right?
The
Is that-
Lakota tribe.
I was gonna say that's like those
That's
are Native
the
American.
Native American
Right.
tribe that, yeah.
Okay, I recognize Somaliland. I don't know if that's a flag though.
I don't think that doesn't look like a Native American flag to me. But since I know Lakota's real, I'm going to go with the Lakota tribe.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
I'm gonna,
No, you go.
I'm gonna go away from y'all and go with Danetta. I don't know if that's real or not, but
If we're splitting,
These are all real for the
I'll
record.
go Lubicon.
Well, then I guess that leaves me no choice with Somaliland.
Congratulations, Brandon. It was Lakota. I'll tell you a bit about it. Okay, so Lakota is an unrecognized independent republic that was proposed in 2007 by an activist named Russell Means. This is a Native American tribe, the Lakota, you're correct, in the Midwest. So this country would exist as an enclave within the United States, stretching from Iowa into Montana, nearly up to the Canadian border. The land was originally promised to the Native Americans before it was taken back in Western expansion. After gold was discovered in the land. Like I mentioned earlier, this country was proposed by an activist, not a member of the Lakota people themselves, meaning it wasn't even their idea. So in fact, the leaders of the Lakota tribe don't even really want this country to exist.
Nice.
But that's the story of Lakota.
Just getting a country forced upon you.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Right? Just take this land. You have a choice.
That's amazing.
yeah.
I'm a big fan.
Hmm.
Shout out to the Lakota tribe.
I like
Oh,
this.
beautiful.
Cool Runnington. Why do I feel like this is you?
This is mine.
Oh my god.
This is mine.
Okay.
Gone
Latin
land. You didn't even
endings
try.
on the really interesting.
Slow Jamistan.
Gone land is kind of crazy.
Did you make some of these names up?
No, these are all real. Yeah, I made most
I'm
of them
gonna
up.
go with Dysphoria
I might
just
also-
because there's Latin on the flag,
Right? I was
and
thinking
Dysphoria sounds the closest. I don't speak Latin, but
dysphoria. Dysphoria, that reminds me of diaspora.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go with dysphoria.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll go Dysphoria too, or the Latin raisin.
join the bandwagon.
Slow Jamistan sounds so much fun. I'm going to do that one.
You made the best choice of your life.
That's awesome.
This is the country of Slow Jamistan, located in the Californian desert. The leader and founder of this is a man by the name of Randy R. Williams. He's a
So
radio
sick.
host from San Diego. And he is shown, according to the website, the Slow Jamistan website, which, by the way, you can apply for citizenship. You can get a visa. You can get a passport.
Nice.
It's really just a couple of folks out there in the desert with trailers and tents and whatnot, but it's very fun. He hosts a radio show called Sunday Night Slow Jams, and it's 200 different radio stations across the country. It's kind of a big deal. This guy is my new favorite person in the world. So he calls himself the Admiral, which is really awesome. And he actually recently changed his title, to the Sultan of Slowjamistan.
I was about to ask, is it a presidential system,
It
martial
is.
law?
It is. So right now they are actually trying to create government buildings, and you can apply to be. The titles are Prince, Czar, or Knight. If you would like to be a Czar or a Prince. This man is also an amazing person. He's not just some dude out in the desert. So he was on Shark Tank. He actually just finished his mission of visiting every country in the world. And yes, that includes North Korea. He was in North Korea as well. He's visited every country in the world. In his free time, he goes to Africa and builds wells for African villages that don't have water, which is really cool. He has a foundation called Water for Kids, and he goes out and builds wells. They have a TikTok, they have a YouTube, they were on the Kelly Clarkson show, CNN. Like I said, visas and passports, and they have no taxes, no laws, but according to the website, they're going through some financial trouble right now. So if anybody wants to donate to Slowjamistan, you heard it here first.
Well, I already have dual citizenship, but maybe I'll have to sacrifice one of the passports. Pissed it'll be the American one.
And it's found off Route 78 in California, by the way.
Oh,
if
wow.
anybody plans a visit,
Road trip.
70 miles south of San Diego, southeast, a little bit out into the desert, but more
I
than
think
welcome
your
to pay a
Lion
visit.
FM background is showing with the podcast for the first countries.
And he has a YouTube and a TikTok. And Randy R.W. Williams is all I have to say.
I'm subscribing.
History Panel road trip, am I right?
All right, let's go Slowjamistan. Oh, this is me.
Two Somalilands and
Yeah,
one.
and me and
one
James are
graphic.
just like this.
Wow.
It's on the same wavelength all the time.
I'm gonna go Somaliland because earlier you said I know Somaliland.
That
Hiding my notes.
I think that might be Tigray. That's not the flag of Kurdistan. I know that.
Okay, she knows
And-
her stuff. She knows her flags.
Yeah, I think it's Tigray.
Okay, you know what? I'm gonna go with your confidence on that. I'll go Tigray too.
If
on,
I'm
Audrey.
wrong.
I know
I
where
gotta stick with my girl.
I know where Somaliland is, and I know that Somalia has a star on their flag. I also see a star here, so that's my only logic. I'm gonna go with Somaliland.
Love the deductive reasoning on there, but Shay was and Audrey by default was right.
Yes.
Tigray. So this
No
is
way.
this is an area in Ethiopia actually that has been fighting to be independent for quite some time now. Since the presidential reign of Meles Zenawi, he governed them and he backed the freedom movement for Tigray. But then when he was removed from power, they got into conflict again in 2022, and it's been one of the deadliest conflicts in the African continent in the 21st century. And they're fighting really hard to secede from Ethiopia. There's a lot of ethnic tensions, but a lot of underlying economic tensions. So it's a pretty bad situation right now. But yeah, I mean, kind of in the same boat as Somaliland, they're also fighting to be their own country. So we'll see where that goes from now.
Very cool. All right. Well, I think Audrey, I think you were our reigning champion today. I could be wrong, but I believe so.
Let's go.
Unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for today. Thank you for joining us on the History Panel. We look forward to seeing you next time. Back to you, Nikolai.
Thanks, James. Stay tuned for another edition of At the Desk International. We'll be right back. We are back at the desk. Let's hand it over to Ryan and Lauren for the latest in international politics. Over to you guys.
Welcome to this edition of ATD's International Politics and World News Update. I'm Ryan Lowy.
And I'm Lauren Perry.
We begin tonight at our southern border, where Mexico's Navy has announced its largest ever maritime drug bust. In a major operation conducted off the country's southwestern Pacific coast, naval personnel seized over 8 tons of illicit cargo with an estimated value of 2.1 billion pesos, the United States equivalent to $105 million. 23 individuals have been arrested due to the operation, along with the seizing of 5 boats, a submersible, and 8,700 liters of fuel. In recent weeks, Mexico's Navy has also intercepted 7 tons of drugs in 2 other operations along the same coastline, highlighting the increase of attention to Mexico's cartel war under newly inaugurated President Claudia Sheinbaum.
After more than a year since the devastating Hamas attacks on Israel, the Israeli military claim they have killed the leader of Hamas. According to U.S. officials, the death of the Hamas leader poses an opportunity for a ceasefire after Israel has now killed several Hamas's commanders. According to CNN, both sides of the Gaza conflict stated the fighting will continue. In a recorded video, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu said Sinwar's death marked, quote, the beginning of the day after Hamas. But this task before us is not yet complete. Hamas has now confirmed Sinwar's death and reports they will not release the Israeli hostages until, quote, aggression on our people in Gaza stops.
Hurricane season continues in the Gulf of Mexico, where Hurricane Oscar officially made landfall on Sunday, bringing heavy rains and strong winds down south to Cuba. Hurricane Oscar arrived to a nation already experiencing multiple power outage issues from the main island's failing and poorly conditioned power grid. After Oscar is set to pass later this week, authorities warn the island will have a major humanitarian crisis ahead. Cuba has already been struggling, as reports say as much as 88% of its citizens are in poverty, while also reporting a widening gap in income and living standards.
The United States has imposed sanctions on 2 China-based drone suppliers and their reported Russian partners. The United States has long accused China of supporting Russia's war effort, but this is the first time China has been punished for supplying Russia with a complete weapon system. This past Thursday, according to CNN, the U.S. Treasury Department accused China of a direct involvement in creating arms supplies to Moscow. Chinese companies have collaborated with Russian defense in manufacturing drones. These drones were made and designed in China before being sent to Russia for use on the battlefield.
Well, that's all that we have today here for AT International. We'll see you on election night. Back to you, Nikolai.
Thanks, Ryan and Lauren. Sadly, that is all the time we have for today. In the meantime, stay updated with At the Desk on all our socials at PSU at the Desk, and let us know what you want to see us cover next. I'm Nikolai Wagner, and we'll see you back at the desk next week.
Bye.